In June of 2011, those en route from New Jersey to Charlotte may have seen a rather unusual sight: the main body of a plane, specifically of an Airbus A320-214, being hauled along the interstate by a truck. That same company also towed the plane's wings and its back end on the 8-day journey across several states. The size of their load forced them at times to get special permits and take down city streetlights. You might wonder why they did all this, as well as ship the plane's engines down later in 6 large crates. You'll soon find out in this episode of the Infographics Show. The Miracle on the Hudson. U.S. Airways Flight 1549 cleared the runway of LaGuardia Airport at 3:24 p.m. on January 15, 2009, holding 150 passengers and 5 crew. In command was pilot Captain Chelsea Sullenberger, best known as Sully, and alongside him sat Jeff Skiles, his co-pilot, who had just completed his training on the aircraft they flew. Transcripts of their conversation in the cockpit in the minutes that followed revealed rather mundane conversation, including Sully admiring the beautiful scenery. Though it was a chilly 20 degrees Fahrenheit, there was something magical about the Hudson River's shimmering waters down below. But despite appearances, the flight would soon take a disastrous turn. The 150,000-pound Airbus reached an altitude of 700 feet at 230 miles per hour, and at 3:26, Sully contacted air traffic control for clearance to ascend further. A minute after that, it was at 3,000 feet and flying above the Bronx at 250 miles per hour, when suddenly, a flock of Canadian geese flying only 50 miles per hour appeared out of seemingly nowhere. Seeing the geese, Sully screamed. Not long after, Skiles cursed. Those in the plane would describe the sounds of the 4 8-pound birds sucked into the CFM56 5B engines as similar to shoes in a dryer. From the windows of the cabin, passengers could see the engines burst into flames. Then, as their heat cooked the birds' liquefied remains, or snarge, the cabin filled with the smell of burning flesh. The left engine failed first, followed by the one on the right. Almost immediately, the plane became deafeningly and terrifyingly silent. In horror, passengers screamed while others sobbed, and many began to pray. Though they still moved, they started to glide as they now had no thrust or forward propelling power. Experts later claimed that chances were just 1 in a billion at that point that all aboard wouldn't die. Fortunately, Sully, with close to 20,000 hours of commercial airline piloting experience, remained calm and considered the 1 in that statistic a possibility. He had 208 seconds to work with, or less than 4 minutes, to decide the best thing to do. In all his pilot training, this was a scenario he had never had the opportunity to practice, so he was completely on his own in uncharted territory. Still, he kept a level head and weighed his best options for landing that could save everyone on board. He first considered returning to LaGuardia before realizing they wouldn't make it without thrust and declining altitude. He then briefly suggested the option of a runway at Teterboro. However, even that was ultimately too far. When told that runway 1 at Teterboro had been cleared, he said that they couldn't do it. It was just minutes after takeoff when Sully grabbed the intercom, and the first and only time he spoke to his terrified passengers. His message was all of 3 words: brace for impact. Seconds later, he told air traffic control they weren't going to try for runway, but would be in the Hudson instead. In shock, the control asked if he could repeat his message again, as the warning systems repeatedly urged the captain and his co-pilot to pull up, and that they were too low and the terrain was too near. They ignored them as they prepared to land on their only viable option, the river. It would be only the 4th time ever that a commercial flight made an emergency landing on the water. The men in the cockpit guided the plane toward the Hudson. However, to make it, they would first have to successfully navigate the George Washington Bridge. The plane ended up successfully clearing this obstacle with a cushion of 900 feet, as well as navigating past parts of heavily populated Upper Manhattan. Alarmed residents watched in shock and amazement as it passed uncomfortably close to them in their high-rise apartments. Then both men in the cockpit braced as the plane glided without power toward the water at 150 miles per hour. Those observing would describe it as continuing without noticeably slowing down as it hit the waves full force, then abruptly stopped. Flight 1549 landed on the Hudson River with its nose pointed up at 3:32 in the afternoon, just over 5 minutes after it had originally taken off. It was likely the longest few minutes of the passengers' and crew's lives. Fortunately, while its lower half was submerged and it slowly began to leak water, it still remained afloat. The crew worked to guide all passengers through the emergency exits to stand outside in a huddle on both of its wings. Remarkably, no one panicked, and all worked together to evacuate a passenger in a wheelchair and to hand out vests to those outside. While some inadvertently slipped into the waves, others, worried that the aircraft could explode, jumped in the water and swam off to a safer distance. Before exiting himself, Captain Sullenberger made sure to walk through the entire plane 2 times to ensure no one had been left behind. It was only 3 minutes after the plane hit the water that the first rescue ferry arrived. As it and additional boats and ferries began to approach, many of the passengers lining the wings or treading water uncontrollably shivered. In the current conditions, many were getting extremely cold quite quickly. As it was, everyone was rescued in record time. The New York Police Commissioner claimed that all were in a boat in the span of 5 minutes following their water landing. Remarkably, not a single person died. This was due to the pilot's skill, mixed in with a little bit of luck. Many ferries at 3:30 were preparing for the busiest time of the day and were ready and available to assist with the rescue. That said, the water was still vacant enough that no ferries, tankers, or barges were floating in the way as the plane tried to land. Typically, one of the most crowded waterways in the world, the Hudson having areas completely free of obstacles was very strange. Then, despite one passenger admitting he didn't even fasten his seatbelt, only a handful ended up seriously hurt. More were treated for minor injuries or hypothermia. The mayor of New York quickly came forward to share that Sully did a wonderful job. It was an undertaking of the highest precision, and some claimed that 3 feet one way or the other could have resulted in a much different ending. However, just because the plane had landed did not mean that the ordeal had completely ended. The National Transportation Safety Board still had to conduct its incident investigation. This included in-depth analysis of the plane and the captain's decision-making, as well as the captain and his co-pilot submitting to drug and alcohol testing. Ultimately, an aircraft accident report was released, which included nearly 200 pages of facts, analysis, and conclusions, with supporting charts and figures. It took a year and a half to complete, but in the end, they sided with Sully and supported his actions. Unfortunately, many allege that the way this process was depicted in Clint Eastwood's famous movie about the Hudson-based event dubbed Sully was both unfair as well as inaccurate. Government representatives who were involved didn't appreciate Hollywood's implication that they played the role of prosecution rather than that of an objective investigator. As the leader of the process put it, they weren't the Gestapo or the KGB, but the good guys trying to understand what happened and limit the odds of it happening again. They did ask questions, many personal and at times uncomfortable, during their 18-month-long investigation, but that's just to fully understand what happened, why, and when. As a consequence, the real-life Sullenberger portrayed in the movie by Tom Hanks requested that the real names of investigators in the movie be changed. He claimed that their job was an important one, and Eastwood's portrayal of how they acted was less than fair. Unfortunately, it may have been damaging as well, as it showed the government working against the best interests of the pilots and their passengers, instead of with and for them. Sully, on the other hand, was played well and accurately. He truly was the silent yet brilliant pilot Tom Hanks portrayed, and at first, Sully, who preferred to keep to himself, was quite overwhelmed with his overnight fame. But in time, he saw it as less of a burden and instead as an opportunity to educate others and bring attention to aviation safety. He has continued to make a positive difference, as there's room for improvement in many areas. Further, there's always the possibility that birds will once again hit another plane. Believe it or not, birds often cause problems for planes before the unplanned 2009 Hudson landing, and still continue to pose a potential threat long after. Between 1990 and 2016, bird strikes went up from 1,850 to 13,408 in the United States, and from 2008 to 2015, total international incidents were close to 98,000. Subsequent damage amounts to $1 billion each year. Flights have been diverted and windshields cracked due to various chance encounters, and even Air Force Two was hit on its right side by a bird while Vice President Joe Biden was traveling on it in 2012. The miracle on the Hudson has since inspired the National Transportation Safety Board to warn airports to take whatever measures necessary to limit plane interaction with wildlife, particularly but not exclusively with those that fly. They have approached this problem in different ways. To limit the presence of birds, they've taken away their sources of water, shelter, and food. Unfortunately, at times more drastic measures are required, and LaGuardia and JFK airports often round up and gas their geese. New technology is also in the works that's meant to detect bird presence with the use of radar. This is somewhat challenging, however, due to their small size. Unfortunately, thus far, screens on jet engines blocking birds from entry have also proven impractical and impair engine function. The good news is that now, thanks to the Hudson incident, bird strike preparation is included in most airline trainings. If a similar incident were to happen again, it's still highly unlikely that it'll have as happy an ending. This is why US Airways Flight 1549, a part of a miracle as well as aviation history, needed preserving, and why hiring multiple flatbed trucks to do the hauling over state lines was more than worth it. After its over a week-long journey to Charlotte, the plane was reassembled. This required the efforts of American airline volunteers in addition to Airbus, Hunter Recker, Freeman Ryan Design, and Disaster One representatives. The UNC Charlotte engineering students did their part as well by designing a stand to hold it in place. With its tail almost in contact with the ceiling, it's a monstrous presence in the room of the Aviation Museum in which it's displayed. It's a reminder that in the face of impending disaster, we should still strive to do our best, and we might just pull off the seemingly impossible. What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you on a plane? And do you still enjoy flying? Let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other video called A Crocodile with a Kill Count of over 300. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.